Okay.
And then I've just started the stream, so as soon as some question comes.
Okay, I just sent you a question.
Yeah, I will just, you can start with the introduction. I'm just setting up a computer for you.
Okay. Hare Krishna. Welcome to the question and answers from Sri Krishna Balaram Temple in Vrindavan. Some questions are coming in from the net. There was one very nice question. If you could read that to me, then I can start with that. There's a description, well, today being Nrsingadev's appearance day, while the questions are being collected, I'd like to glorify Lord Nrsingadev and Prahlad Maharaj. When Nrsingadev appeared, there was such a large sound within the universe that Lord Brahma and all the demigods heard it, the commotion and the roaring of the Lord. So they immediately came to the spot, but they stayed very far away from Lord Nrsingadev. They were afraid to come near him because of his angry mood and the blood. And normally when the Lord appears, the demigods will come, they'll offer sweet words, they'll offer a garland, do artik, invite him to sit down on an asan. But in this case, no one was brave enough to come near him. So from a distance, they began to offer their prayers. Even Lakshmi Devi was afraid to come near him. So finally, Brahmaji, he suggested that Prahlad go and try to pacify the Lord. Now within that time, because no one had offered the Lord a garland, so the Lord garlanded himself with the intestines of Hiranyakashipu. And then when Prahlad came, he being just a small child, Nrsingadev was so happy to see him and so pleased that he put his hand on Prahlad Maharaj's head. And just as with Dhruva Maharaj, because Dhruva Maharaj was just a 5-year-old boy, he hadn't done any studies, he didn't know how to offer prayers when the Lord appeared. But when the Lord touched him with his conch, he immediately received all knowledge and was able to offer beautiful prayers to the Lord. So similarly, when the Lord touched Prahlad on the head with his hand, he then received the power to offer beautiful stuti to the Lord, that which we study. And the main essence of his prayers was that I have no qualification. I was born in an Ugra Kula, in a family of demons. I have no education, nothing. So what is it that has graced me with your protection and your love? There's nothing that attracts the Lord, such as aristocracy, beauty, knowledge, power, learning. The only thing that attracts the Lord is our bhakti, our devotion. So this is the essence of Prahlad Maharaj's exchange with the Supreme Lord, that whatever background we have, wherever we're coming from, if we approach the Lord with bhakti, then he's satisfied with us. Is there anything that we can start with now? Fine. Just before the class started, a very, very interesting question came in. One devotee was having trouble about where he should serve here in the temple. This department, that department, this department head, that department head. And the example of ISKCON being a boat came up. That if we move around too much from this service to that service, it rocks the boat. It's better to stay where we are and try to perfect the service that we're doing. So being, having English as maybe his third language, he couldn't understand what rocking the boat meant. So finally he understood, and he posed a question. question's not there. Yeah. Hare Krishna Mataji Dandavat Pranam. I am 20 years old in ISKCON. I have seen so many devotees coming and going. There's no way to make it go down.
I'll just repeat because it can just...
Okay. Whoever is not following
Prabhupada, the captain of the boat is going back again in the material world and suffering like cats and dogs. This is my understanding that no one can rock this boat. If someone is not following Prabhupada or making a disturbance, he has to go back to the material world. But this boat is fully protected by Prabhupada, who is the chief commander of Lord Gaur Nitai. Therefore, for the next 10,000 years, no one can rock this boat. This is my understanding. So from yesterday, I was confused about how, when we make disturbance, we cause the boat to rock. Is it really possible that anyone has the power to rock this boat? Please clarify this point.
and the audience was able to hear that? No.
I'm going to write that question there, Mother. You can start with the...
Okay. He's asking that is it actually possible to cause a disturbance on the boat of ISKCON with Prabhupada as the supreme captain and chief? So we have seen in the past, we'll take example of the Gaudiya Math, that at the physical disappearance of the Acharya, immediately fire broke out. And because they did not follow the instructions of their spiritual master, he wanted them to make a 12-man GBC committee to run the preaching affairs of the Gaudiya Math. Immediately, two different factions developed, and they wanted to assign two different acharyas who would do all of the initiations. So as a result of that, there was a lot of breakup amongst the disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. But the boat did not sink because Srila Prabhupada, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, who we call Srila Prabhupada, he carried on, and he was able to successfully establish the preaching organization just as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had instructed. He formed the GBC, Governing Body Commission. Whenever he got money, he printed books. Is there a fan or anything to put on? It's very hot here in this corner.
We have an AC there, there is no fan.
Something. He also did not assign Acharya at the time of his disappearance. He insisted that the society continue to be run by the GBC, and then the GBC has their representatives in each zone of the world. So yes, there has been some rocking of this boat during the disappearance time of Srila Prabhupada, but generally, as you also mentioned in your question, these people who rock the boat, they fall back into the ocean. Now, what is this boat? This boat is taking us from one shore to the other. And in between is a large Bhavasindhu, the ocean of the material world. But the great saintly persons, such as Srila Prabhupada, when we enter this boat, this ocean shrinks to the size of a calf's hoof print. So at the same time, the boat is on one shore, it's taking us immediately to the destination, which is Krishna's lotus feet, by the shrinking of this Bhavasindhu. But when one rocks the boat, and that means doesn't follow the instructions of the spiritual master, then they fall again into this vast ocean of material nature. And when Prabhupada, he heard that some of the devotees were leaving in the early days, Brahmananda, he coined an expression when the devotees fall back again into the material world. There's a sound when you drop something a little distance from the water and it falls into the water. The sound is bloop. So he coined that expression that when devotees fall again into the material world, he said that was just like blooping. So when we cannot follow the 4 regulative principles, when we commit offenses, the 10 offenses to the holy name, the offenses to the spiritual master, the offenses to the holy Dham, that's considered to be just like rocking this boat. The boat doesn't sink, but we might fall out of the boat and bloop again into this dangerous material ocean of suffering composed of the 3 modes of material nature. Are there any more questions?
Online there are no questions. We can take some offline questions.
Are there any offline questions anyone might have?
You can repeat the question, Mataji, if you can. You can repeat the question.
Okay.
Hare Krishna. So my question is that since this is Srinath Chaturdasi, there are personalities like Prahlad Maharaj who, when they engage, and when they're protected by the Lord and they go back to Godhead, then when the next Yuga cycle comes and then that personality has to reappear, then do they come back to the material world in order to engage in the Lord's pastimes? If so, how do we understand that when one goes back to Godhead, then they never come back to material existence again? Because in Prahlad Maharaj's case, in his previous life, he was a householder, and we know the story of when his girlfriend left him, and then he was disappointed, and then he engaged in the Agyata Sukriti of fasting and being in Hogalam and so on. So how to understand this?
Well, in principle, the Supreme Lord is so merciful that he personally decides to come to the material world to, out of his compassion, to remind the devotees of their constitutional position as they being his servant. So in the case of Sri Krishna, he has a fixed time when he appears, the 28th cycle of the Yugas in Kali Yuga, at the end of the Dwapara Yuga, just at the end before Kali Yuga begins. And he then he doesn't come alone, because just like a king, when he travels somewhere, he goes with his entire entourage. So he brings his devotees with him from the spiritual world to this place, to the holy Dham, and he engages in pastimes that attract the living entities who are suffering in the material world. Now, when the different Leela avatars appear, they have their own planets, they have their devotees in Vaikuntha, and naturally when he appears, his devotees appear with him. Just as Lord Ramachandra, when he appeared, all the devotees came along with him. So in the case of Nrsingadev, he also has his devotees, and his devotees, because it's a Leela avatar, he appears for to perform particular Leela, and then he returns to his abode with his devotees. So it would be assumed that Prahlad Maharaj, he would also go wherever the Supreme Lord goes. There are some devotees, Prabhupada explains, who do not go back to Godhead, such as Arjuna. He remains within this material world, and he travels along with the Lord from universe to universe, wherever he's performing his Leela. So possibly, although I've never read it, there is a possibility that Prahlad Maharaj and others, because Prahlad Maharaj is situated on a particular planet, as described in the 5th canto, where he's always worshiping the Lord in solitude and praying for his service and praying to be able to do something. He's always seeing the great service of the other devotees. So he might remain here in order to take part again in the Lord's Leela. I've never read in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Yes, in the Puranas there's a mention of a previous life of Prahlad Maharaj. But then after his liberation, it doesn't mean that he has to take birth again like that. So when the Lord appears, naturally his devotees will appear along with him. And these different Leelas, they change according to the millennia, according to the universes where they're being enacted. It's not that everything is static and the exact same thing happens when the Lord appears. And that's why there's some differentiations. For instance, in the example of Varahadev, different pastimes happen at different appearances of Varahadev. And he also appears in different colors. So there's variety even in the appearance of the Supreme Lord and the different Leelas that he manifests. So we're reading Srimad Bhagavatam, and we're reading about the particular pastimes of the Supreme Lord. And if we refer to so many other Puranas, he took birth previous like this, like that, it can be a little confusing. So for our understanding, we have the Srimad Bhagavatam to follow and to understand perfectly. And if there's some confusion, we should just stick to what's mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, how Prahlad Maharaj is situated on a planet here in the material world where he's always praying for the Lord's service. And the Lord appears and he manifests his Leela, and how he, because I've never heard that he's appeared in different places. Perhaps someone more scholarly can answer that. But let us stick to the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam and try to understand the lessons that are being given in this particular appearance of the Lord, in which Prahlad has taken birth as the son of Hiranyakashipu, and the Supreme Lord appears specifically to protect his young devotee. And if there are other appearances, well, you can search here and there in the different Puranas, and perhaps you'll find your answer. But at least for myself, it's enough to try to understand the lessons that are given to us in this 7th canto by Narada Muni to all of us. I'm sorry that I can't fully answer more than that. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji, please explain more some of the instances. My question is regarding the fasting that we are following today. We follow until a certain time and then we break with non-grain. If someone for service they have to serve grain, are they incurring any sin? Like khichdi.
Oh, like Kitri.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. Today on Nrsimha Chaturdasi, we're observing a fast until dusk, until moonrise. And then we honor non-grains, Ekadasi feasting at that time. So Mataji's question is that if our service entails serving grains to people on this day, do we incur sin for that? Our particular instructions coming from Srila Prabhupada are that we should observe fast until moonrise on the appearance days of the Vishnu Tattva. Now, not everyone is able to observe that, just as even in Ekadasi fasting, there are many different degrees of fasting. We could observe full fast with no water, or we can even take just once a day, twice a day, have fruits, nuts, and roots, or Prabhupada's final instruction was fasting means feasting. So, and he taught us that on Ekadasis we would have very nice prasadam, because he understood that not everyone was capable of doing Nirjala Ekadasi. So there are different degrees. So we may choose to personally fast until moonrise and only eat Ekadasi prasadam. Some people are not capable of doing that. It's not an Ekadasi. So Ekadasi is a very special day given by the Lord because Papa Purush, the Lord gave him the residence of grains on these Ekadasi days. So that's why we don't eat grains on that day. So I have not read anywhere that, yes, in the book written by Sanatana Goswami, I forget the name right now, where all of the rules and regulations are given, there might be something mentioned there. But certainly, Prabhupada did not give us all the rules and regulations to follow because of our particular capacities within the present day. So if we're distributing prasadam, certain these people will still be purified. And personally, if you feel that you're doing a valuable service by giving the prasadam to the visitors, then please continue to do so. And if you feel that, no, I shouldn't be doing this, then on that one day, you can refrain from distributing the prasadam and someone else can do it. It's a personal choice unless you want to very strictly follow, and that might not be possible for everyone. So for yourself, I know even Srila Prabhupada, being able to cook for him at times here, even on Janmashtami, Srila Prabhupada would be giving classes on Janmashtami, meeting people continually until midnight. And he would sometimes ask for peta. Peta is a sweet that we can take on Ekadasi. So he would take that peta for energy. So are you going to say that this is a sin, that Prabhupada is going to, incur some sinful reaction? No, he was being practical because he had so much service he had to perform. And he would drink water, he would take misri water on Janmashtami and the peta and things like that, Ekadasi things, so that he could help others in their Krishna consciousness. So it's a personal choice unless you want to be very, very strict. If I guess you're not distributing khichdi today, so you made that choice.
No, I did.
Oh, you did. So you felt that, yes, let me continue in the service. Right, exactly. Because not everyone is able to perform that fasting as we do.
Thank you.
Okay, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Mataji, in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna speaks to Arjuna, says he was speaking about the sun god. He has speaking Bhagavad Gita to sun god, and to different time he has spoken to everyone. And he says, Arjuna, you were present, but you don't remember. In present, past and future, everybody is present, and I know everything, but nobody knows everything. So how we understand that we were present during that time, or we were present in the past, present and future? How to understand this?
Well, the nature of the jiva is he is eternal. There's no beginning and there's no end. Anadi, Anadir Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam. Just as we're parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. And Prabhupada gives an example that just like if you take a substance, let's say a rock, and you throw it, some of the rocks might be bigger and some might be tiny little particles. So, but that original rock is the Supreme Lord. And the bigger particles are his sphinxes, that's his personal incarnations. And the tiny little particles are the jivas, such as ourself. We're all composed of the same elements, Sat, Chit, and Ananda, just our sizes are different. So the Supreme Lord, being eternally present, we also are eternally present, but our forms change. His form also changes, but by his supreme will. Our forms change according to Daiva Natrena, whatever our karmic reactions are, we're awarded a particular body. And this is an eternal process until we take shelter of the Supreme Lord and return to our constitutional position in the spiritual world. So again, I have to refer back to what Srila Prabhupada said. Arjuna, he does not return to the spiritual world, but he goes from universe to universe to take part in Krishna's Leela wherever Krishna is appearing. Just as the sun moves around the planet Earth, and the sun can be seen one place in one country, and then another country, then another country. It's being seen by different people at different times. But the sun is always present. So we also, and the eternal associates of the Supreme Lord, wherever the Lord is appearing, they're also going with him. And that also explains how the Supreme Lord chooses to come from the spiritual world for the benefit of the living entities. So the Lord, he comes, and his associates are there with him when he comes. Some are descending from the spiritual world, some are here, and some are coming up, the sadhaks. So there are three different types of eternal associates of the Lord. Those who are coming with him, those who are already here, and those who are coming up to eventually enter into the eternal pastimes of the Lord. So in that respect, Arjuna will always be with the Lord wherever he's appearing. He'll take different births in order to assist the Lord, just like in the Narayan appearance. That's also Arjuna in the form of Nara, when the Lord appears as Narayan. So according to the particular mission of the Lord and the different forms he takes, also in Chaitanya Leela, he appears as Ramananda Roy. So the devotee will also assume different forms according to the Leela that the Lord is enacting, but he will always be with the Lord as an eternal associate. And that's how we have to understand that. Now, what we were at the time, well, we don't know what we were. Even Arjuna can't remember what he was. But the Supreme Lord, he knows he's Trikalagya, he knows past, present, and future. So our only real duty is to surrender to the Supreme Lord, become his pure devotee, become a part of his entourage, and then we can be assured that wherever the Lord goes, we will go along with him, although we might not remember what form we were in when we were enacting in his pastimes with him. All right?
One more, Mataji. This pastime of kidnapping of Subhadra.
Yes.
So Arjuna, he dressed him as sannyasi.
Yes.
So any person can dress as sannyasi and do as he like.
No, of course not. This was a tricky plan by Krishna to do that. Because Krishna didn't want to disappoint his elder brother Balaram. And Balaram had a soft spot for Duryodhana, because Duryodhana was one of his students in club fighting. So of the two, let's say Bhima and Duryodhana, Bhima was more powerful, but Duryodhana was more skillful. So Balaram, understanding Duryodhana to be a very skillful and surrendered pupil of his, he wanted his sister to marry Duryodhana. But Krishna and Subhadra wanted her to marry Arjun. So rather than confronting his elder brother and causing a family feud, they made this secret plan that Arjun would come in the form of a sannyasi and eventually kidnap Subhadra. And then, eventually, Balaram would come to understand that this was the desire of Subhadra, that she wanted to marry Arjun, and his heart would then be softened. So, no, of course not. One should not take the dress of a sannyasi, and this is when the example of when Indra came as several different forms of sannyasis and renunciates. This is the beginning of the degradation of the sannyas order. But we, as ordinary living entities, have to be very careful not to become cheaters like that. Whatever varna, whatever ashram we're in, for the pleasure of the Supreme Lord, we should perform the duties of that varna and ashram to please Vishnu. And if our spiritual master wants us to take the sannyas order in order to preach more, then we can accept that order. And even sometimes we've seen devotees have accepted the sannyas order. They can't fulfill the vows of sannyas, so then they return to another ashram in which they're more comfortable. But at no time, as a matter of cheating, should we accept the sannyas dress or order in order to get some type of benefit, because that will be devastating in our spiritual life. We should understand, and the spiritual master, he understands the mentality and the quality of his devotee, the qualification, and he keeps them in that particular status or ashram so that he doesn't commit offense, such as artificially accepting sannyas and not being able to follow the vows. So this was an exceptional situation, and it was a part of the Lord's Leela, and just as all the other Lord's Leela, we shouldn't imitate by accepting artificially the dress of a sannyasi just so that we can kidnap a woman and marry her.
There's a question on the screen.
Mataji, can we read Chaitanya Charitamrita first without completely reading Srimad Bhagavatam? Well, we were very fortunate. Srila Prabhupada, before he translated the entire Chaitanya Charitamrita, he gave a series of lectures from Chaitanya Charitamrita that was later compiled into a book called The Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So before you complete the entire Srimad Bhagavatam, you might read first the Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and along with the reading of Srimad Bhagavatam, there were 5 books that that Prabhupada recommended that we always study. That's Bhagavad Gita, Sri Ishopanishad, Srimad Bhagavatam, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya or Chaitanya Charitamrita, and the Nectar of Devotion. So if you're able to, you can study each one of these 5 books every day. Take a little time out, and that will give you a very rounded understanding. So generally, just after coming to the point of surrender, then we study the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is an elaboration of the devotees who have Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because it was he, the Supreme Lord, who came in the form of a devotee to teach us how to be the ideal devotee. So yes, you can read, you can hear the different classes of Srimad Bhagavatam, you can study the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, but in order to get the full understanding of Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's better that you first... Question?
Offline question.
Yes, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Please accept my humble obeisance. Jai Shri Prabhupada. Mataji, I want to ask a question about karmas. Like in material life, someone or blood relation, some near dear ones, they trouble us so much in form of the son or daughter troubling us, or he is just bound to trouble us because we have to suffer because of our past karmas.
Hmm.
So,
Well, today is a wonderful day to answer that question, because we see personally what happens when even a small little child is troubled by his own father, to the point where the father numerous times tries to kill his own child. And Prahlad, if you study carefully his mentality and how he is able to, he can remain a devotee throughout all of the suffering by simply remembering the Supreme Lord and knowing that he will always be protected. The prime example is when Hiranyakashipu convinced his mother, Prahlad's mother, to feed him poison. And when he was offered the poison, Prahlad Maharaj offered that to the Supreme Lord, and that poison became nectar. So the poison did not affect him. And then when the snakes were sent to bite Prahlad Maharaj, when they saw his saintly character, they just took him on their laps. So all of these, what a frightening situations, because this little boy Prahlad had so much faith in the Lord, because he heard about the Lord from his spiritual master Narada Muni. In every single situation, either the Lord came personally or through some wonderful exchange he were afraid of. So yes, sometimes, just as in the case of the Pandavas and Draupadi, it's not that they were suffering from their karma. The Lord will only give us as many difficulties as he knows we're able to survive with. So the really, really great devotees, they're given a lot of difficulty. You look at Draupadi, you look at Srimati Radharani, she had to suffer in separation from, and all of the residents of Vrindavan, they suffered. They only had Krishna with them for 11 or 12 years, and then the whole rest of their life was simply spent crying. So you can consider yourself to be very special if you're having a lot of sufferings in your life, and it's not only because of your past karma, it's because Krishna is testing you. He's testing your devotion and the amount that you're able to take shelter of him. And you'll see the more you take shelter of him, the more he gives you protection, just as in the case of Prahlad Maharaj. So don't think always that this is just my past karma. No, the Lord is testing you to see how much you'll take shelter of him in all of these situations. And it's and he'll give you that test over and over and over again until you take full shelter from him. And you're a perfect example of that. You've come to Vrindavan, although your family is giving you so much trouble over the years. You're serving here very devotedly. When they call you back, you go back, you do your duty, and then as soon as you come, as soon as you're able to, you come back again to Vrindavan. So you're doing a good job. Hare Krishna.
One more offline question.
Where's that?
Hare Krishna. Desde hace una couple of verses. Mataji, I guess this question arises of meditating, how can I be so offensive and so demoniac sometimes? And I can understand that this because I've been in contact with the material nature since time immemorial. At the same time, I know that everything comes from Krishna. So from where these qualities come? Like, how can someone become so demoniac, evil, not inclined towards devotional activities?
Can you give an example?
Myself, like, prefer not to do something devotional
or becoming lazy or being offensive towards a Vaishnava. This kind of nature.
What type of offense?
Well, as simple as not being happy once you see a devotee, or I mean, I can't think of any one in specific, but I know I can be very offensive. So I just wonder from where this, because we all come from Krishna, and everything comes from Krishna, and even the demons were devotees previously, but how do we become like this?
You're an initiated disciple, yes?
Yes.
And your spiritual master has given you particular instructions. The first being to follow the 4 regulative principles and to chant minimum of 16 rounds a day. Then he might have given you further instructions as you're advancing in your devotional life. So you have to go back to the root of your relationship with your spiritual master. Am I following the 4 regulative principles? Am I chanting minimum 16 rounds every day? Because when that vow that we've taken for life is not being observed, then we're not going to get the protection of the Supreme Lord, and the modes of material nature will certainly overcome us. So this chanting of Hare Krishna, the minimum being 16 rounds every day, this is a protective shield against the 3 modes of material nature. And if we don't have that shield up, if we're not being protected, then there's a good chance that we will be attacked by Maya in the form of the 3 modes of nature. Now, if we're feeling lazy, we don't want to engage in devotional service, well, that's the mode of ignorance. If we're aggressive and angry, sometimes violent, that's the mode of passion. And if we're feeling proud, or if if sometimes even the mode of goodness can be contaminating, because we're feeling that we know more than others know, and therefore we don't have to listen to other people. So the modes will overcome us if we're not protected by the holy name, and also especially by following the 4 regulative principles. Because if we break the principles, that's committing sin, and then that's one of the 10 offenses to the holy name. So then our chanting also does not have the effect. So those 2 things have to go together. One is for externally purification of the body, and the other, the chanting, that's for the internal purification of the mind. So as a grihastha with so many duties to perform, and your life isn't your own to live the way you want it to, you have a child, you have a husband with so many demands, if nothing else, you try your best to follow the 4 regulative principles and somehow or other get your 16 rounds chanted. And then you'll be protected from these onslaughts of material nature. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Hare Krishna. Mataji, in 2nd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, in the 2nd chapter, 2nd canto and 2nd chapter, where Sukadeva Goswami is describing about a universal form of the Lord, different parts of the Lord. He is mentioning that we have to meditate on those parts of the Lord. So, what do you suggest? Whether we take a center of the universal form of the Lord, or take the center of Lord Krishna?
The universal form of the Lord is one of the forms of Sri Krishna. It's for the beginning devotees who don't understand that the Supreme Lord has His own form, His own activities, His own planet, His devotees. The universal form is for the pantheists who are still trying to understand that the Supreme Lord exists. So by those descriptions of Sukadeva Goswami in the second canto, we can fix our mind on the different aspects of the Lord's body, and therefore eventually come to the conclusion that yes, the Lord does have a body, and I can associate with Him, I can talk to Him, I can eat with Him, I can play with Him. So this is the very preliminary stage of devotional service. Now, artificially, we're not recommended to meditate on anything when we're chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. We're recommended to hear the holy names, and by hearing, our consciousness becomes purified, and automatically the Lord will appear within our heart, and all of His different qualities, His pastimes, His sweetness will appear at the same time. So artificially, you don't have to meditate on the different what are they called? The feet, and then the legs, and then the waist, and then the chest. No, you chant Hare Krishna, listen to the names very carefully, and the Lord Himself will manifest in your heart, dancing with Srimati Radharani, and the entire spiritual world will manifest there in your heart without any external effort on your side, just by purely hearing and chanting.
Lord's appearance and Lord's activities. If we know this, all these things, then we are liberated, or we go back home, back to body.
Janma karma chame divyam evam yo veti tattvataha. Anyone who understands my birth and my activities, tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti sorjuna. That's what Krishna says. He says that when you give up this body, you don't have to come back again to this material world. So that's why we study first the Bhagavad Gita, which is the words of Krishna, then the Srimad Bhagavatam, which are the activities of Krishna, and then we learn about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and how to actually be a devotee. So these three books given by Srila Prabhupada in English language now, you study them, and guaranteed, Prabhupada guarantees it, you will go back to Godhead.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. According to the Varnashram term, after 50 years of age,
50.
50 years,
Yes.
there is one prastashram.
Yes.
You have to remain away from the family. The husband has to remain with the wife, but away from the kids. Isn't it? You have to cut off bit by bit from them and remain away from them so that you can engage yourself in the devotional services.
Yes, that was the example that Srila Prabhupada set for us.
Yeah.
Either he goes with his wife or he goes alone, and the wife stays under the care of the elder children. If there's a son, of course, that'd be very nice, but in any case, those two choices are there at the age of 50, either alone or with the wife. But it's not always possible. Like, for instance, in the Sudras, those Sudras means those who are engaged in activities that are not Vaishya, Kshatriya, and Brahmin, they don't take Vanaprast, and they don't take sannyas either. The Vanaprast ashram is meant for the Kshatriyas and for the Brahmins. So the Vaishyas and the Sudras usually do not take Vanaprast. All right? If they've taken Diksha and they've come to the platform of Brahman, then they might be able to accept the Vanaprast ashram. But mostly those who are in the Vaishya and Sudra type of work, it's not recommended that they take vanaprastha because they're not trained well enough to live separately from their family even. Although it's recommended, they have to be in the association of devotees, take diksha, learn how to live in vanaprastha life, and then they can survive. So, having taken diksha, I don't know whether your husband has taken diksha or not, so he may not be capable of surviving in a vanaprastha ashram. So you should help him to come to the platform where he can take diksha, elevate himself to the Brahminical platform, and then he would be able to live separate from his family, from his work, and eventually prepare to go back to Godhead. Without that association of devotees, without the blessings and the initiation by the spiritual master, it would be practically impossible to accept the vanaprastha ashram. So first responsibility always is that the wife assist the husband to elevate themselves to that platform where they are prepared for diksha and they can follow the principles, and then together they can accept the vanaprastha ashram.
The wife has to assist the husband to elevate.
Yes.
Okay, once the husband is elevated and he leaves the family, okay? But what about the wife? He has to remain in that, the clutches of Maya all the time with the kids who are not allowing her to elevate herself.
Well,
She has to remain with the family forever.
no, she doesn't have to remain with the family forever.
But the husband goes as sannyasi or vanaprastha. He goes away from the family.
Yes.
The wife, he doesn't take the wife along. The
Okay.
wife has to remain with the sons.
Well, when you've taken diksha,
Yeah.
because the varnashram is not being followed strictly now, you have the option to come and render service to your spiritual master in the temples. If your family allows you, you can live in the temples and do full-time service. Or if they still want you to stay with them, and it's not that they always want you to stay with them, and a lot of times the parents are considered a great burden. They'd rather have you move out of the house. So in that case, you're free. But if they want you to stay with them, then you set up your home as a temple, and you can help your children. Of course, why did you have children? You had children so that you can help them come to the platform of liberation. So you still have some duty to your children. And therefore, the wife can be busy trying to help her children become Krishna conscious. If they don't want to be Krishna conscious, then they probably don't want you in the house anyway. So then you're free. I think that's your situation anyway. It's an individual thing, and each person has their different obstacles that they have to cross over before they can become fully surrendered to their spiritual master and his instructions. So I'm sure he's giving you the intelligence how to do that. The fact that you and your husband are both here in Vrindavan now is a very good sign. You've done your service very well.
One last question we can take off.
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay, thank you. So there seems to be a little confusion or should I say controversy around what happens to a pure devotee when they leave this world. Some, Shastra or previous acharyas would say that one has to first take birth in Bhoma Leela and the Lord's pastimes and cannot go directly to the spiritual world. And yet you see, like what Krishna saying in Bhagavad Gita 4:9 that what is that? Janma karma chuna divyam, the English.
One who understands the transcendental nature of my birth and activities does not take birth again.
Does not take
Yes.
birth again.
Yes.
So in a sense of does not take birth again, that means he does not go back to this, does not come back into Bhoma Lila, or is that when one comes into Bhoma Lila, that's also considered not taking birth again?
Well, birth, even the Supreme Lord takes birth, and his devotees also take birth in order to manifest the Leela of the Lord. So there are two different types of birth. One is as part of the Lord's entourage. The devotees, the pure devotees, appear with the Lord. He places them in different situations in order to carry out his pastimes, just as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he had the elders take birth first. In the case of Krishna, he'd called the demigods, you all take birth in the family of the Yadus. So this is the arrangement of the Supreme Lord to assist him in his Leelas. And then the other type of birth is under the clutches of material nature, where we're forced to take birth according to our previous karmic reactions. So it's that type of birth that we don't have to take birth again. We don't take birth in the material world again. Now, so far as taking birth, along with Krishna, to enact his pastimes, that's on the spiritual platform. The devotees aren't touched by the material world. And in some cases, like we have the example of in Dwarka, when the associates, the family members of Krishna, performed some offenses and they killed each other. Well, these were all the demigods who had taken birth, and then they returned back to their situations back in the heavenly planets. Of course, some also went back to the spiritual world along with the Supreme Lord. So we would have to look at each individual, why he's taken birth, how pure his devotion is, and it is a fixed understanding that for the devotee, if he's remembering the Supreme Lord at the time of death, he will go to the universe where the Supreme Lord is having his pastimes to associate with the Nitya Leela devotees of the Lord, so that he can be trained by them in pure devotional service. And then when the Lord winds up his pastimes, he can go back to the spiritual world. But that doesn't mean that he stays there eternally, because the Lord is always appearing out of his compassion in the material world to pick up more of the conditioned souls. So going back to the spiritual world means wherever the Supreme Lord is, that's where that devotee will go. Even amongst Prabhupada's disciples, or any disciple of the spiritual master, it's an eternal relationship. So we go wherever our spiritual master goes to assist him in his activities of uplifting the conditioned souls. So this is an eternal relationship, it's an eternal service, and at the same time that we're engaged in these preaching activities, we also are meditating on our eternal relationship with the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world. So those two planes of consciousness are always there. We're serving our spiritual master within this material world, helping to uplift the fallen souls, and internally, by our chanting, by our devotion, by our different devotional activities, we're associating with the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world in our eternal form. So these two things go on simultaneously, and you can see that in the example of the 6 Goswamis. They were appearing as mendicants externally, Nana Shastra Vichara. They were writing so many books, they were excavating the holy places, but internally they were engaged in their eternal loving service as different manjaris and different associates of the Lord. So these two things go on simultaneously. They're in the spiritual world with the Supreme Lord, engaging in his service, and externally they're preaching, assisting the Supreme Lord, in this case the Lord Chaitanya, to uplift the fallen souls and help them go back to Godhead also. So it's a simultaneous thing, and this birth of the pure devotees is all under the direct supervision of the Supreme Lord, because he wants his devotees to come along with him when he performs his leelas here. So you don't have to worry. Birth for a devotee does not mean a material birth under the laws of nature. It means he's been placed by the Supreme Lord in a particular family, in a particular situation, so that he can take birth in the Lord. He can take part in the Lord's pastimes. Another perfect example is Haridas Thakur. He was placed in the family of Muslims, Mlechas, but that was just to show by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mercy that birth does not matter. It's one's qualification as a devotee. So he was made the Namacharya, although he was born in a Mlecha family. So all of these different so-called births that are taken by the Lord's devotees are part of the Lord's plan to help him uplift those living entities who are still in the snare of Maya, to associate with his pure devotees so that they can make further advancement back to Godhead.
So when Prabhupada says that if you follow these principles, chant the holy name, you'll be able to go back to, you can make it to go, and you should try to make it to go back to God in this lifetime.
Yes.
Is that referring to taking birth in Lila and so on, like the pure devotees that would do that?
Back to Godhead. Back to Godhead. What does back to Godhead mean? It means that we go back to Krishna. Now, if Krishna's having his pastimes somewhere in some universe, that's also back to Godhead. And then eventually we do go back to the spiritual world. But again, it's not static. It's not that we just stay plunked there and we do the same thing every day. No, Krishna is always having his dynamic pastimes because he's so compassionate for those souls who have left him. It's just like a father. If he sees that a child has left his home, he's always meditating on that child. How can I bring him home again? What can I do? So Krishna, for those souls who have left him, he's always devising different schemes, how he can attract those fallen souls back again to engage in his loving service. And we, as the servants of the Lord, we become his assistants in those different leelas that he's performing in all of the unlimited universes, eternally. So nothing is static, that you go to the spiritual world, you stay there, and that's the end. There is no end. There's constant flow of the Lord's pastimes, of his appearance, his so-called disappearance, and that way bringing more and more souls back to the spiritual world with him by associating with his devotees. It's a eternally ecstatic movement back to Godhead, constantly coming and going wherever the Lord wants us to go, so that we can assist him in his pastimes.
So how to overcome that fear that, okay, if I'm going back to the spiritual world, I don't want to come back to the material world, because we know this place to be so horrible. But yet, it may happen that the Lord may want us to come and engage in his pastimes, assist here again, and the devotee might feel afraid. Or is that not possible to feel that fear when one has become self-realized? Because I can say for myself, I'm already contemplating when I remember Kadamba Maharaj leaving this world with such a determination, perfect sage-like way he left this world. I can't imagine myself doing it the way he did it, with such precision and such focus on his deity, looking at them while leaving the body. That it's just incredible. And I think about it that I will not be able to do it. I may not be able to do that. I don't see myself having the power to have that determination. So to leave this world with the right consciousness is difficult. And I think if we have to come back to serve the Lord in the material existence, you know, will that be any different to leave and the right consciousness again and again? How to understand?
You know, just 2 days ago, or yesterday, was the disappearance of Jayananda Prabhu. And Prabhupada wrote a letter to Jayananda after he left the world, saying, I'm missing your association, and I pray that you went back to Krishna. And if you didn't go back to Krishna, then certainly you will be enjoying for thousands of years on the heavenly planets, and then get the opportunity to go back to the spiritual world. But I am sure that you have gone back. So if you look at the example of Kadambakanana Swami and many other devotees who have left this world in fixed determination on the Supreme Lord, we got to see Kushakrata Prabhu, just fixed on his meditation on Radharaman. So have we lived the life that they lived? You can't just look at the last moment of their life, how they were so fixed. Have we been able to give up everything and totally absorb ourselves in service as these great devotees have done? So we don't just look at their last moment of life. We have to look at their entire life and how they prepared for that last moment, giving up all types of sense gratification, devoting themselves entirely to the order of their spiritual master. And then we can feel a little bit more confident that at the moment of death, because our whole life is just a preparation for that last moment. So we have to live our life like these great devotees. And that's why there's so many stories in the Srimad Bhagavatam. That's why reading Srimad Bhagavatam every day is so important, because we hear the lives of the great devotees who spent their whole life preparing for that last moment. And then how, even in the case of Ajamil, he had a severe fall down, but then he was given a second chance. And after he was put back in his body, he then very seriously prepared himself for going back to Godhead by associating with the pure devotees, by chanting the Lord's name, by living in a holy place. So these histories that are given to us in the Srimad Bhagavatam, they are examples of how we can perfect our life. And that's why it's so important to hear Srimad Bhagavatam every day. Jad Bharat, Maharaj Bharat was the king of the whole planet. And he missed his chance because out of his soft, compassionate nature, he became too attached to an orphaned deer. He had to take birth as a deer. Although he was worshipping Shalagram Shila, he was living in Haridwar, he was associating with the other rishis, but he became attached. And then we hear how he had to take birth as a deer, and then he had to take birth again. And in that lifetime, he became serious. He pretended to not be capable of engaging in any type of social exchange. Voluntarily he did that so that he could prepare himself and not have to take birth again. So our lifetime, we have so many pluses. We've met Srila Prabhupada through his teachings, through his disciples. We've taken shelter, we've taken diksha, we've taken our vows. We hopefully are following the 4 regulative principles. We're studying the Srimad Bhagavatam and all of the books written by Srila Prabhupada. All of these are preparing us for that last moment. And if we take advantage, then we can be assured that Krishna personally will assist us so that we can advance in the next lifetime. Now you look at the life of Srila Prabhupada. when he took birth in a family that was associated with Udarandas Thakur, that family, and he, from his childhood, by the example of his father and mother, he was able to learn about pure devotional service. So are we doing that with our children? Are we training them? And Srila Prabhupada, although it appeared that he didn't have time for his devotional life in his student life, he never forgot Krishna even for a moment. So we have to train ourselves in whatever situation of life we're in, that we never forget Krishna. We always stay in the association of devotees. We take shelter of a pure devotee. We take initiation. We take instruction from him, just as Srila Prabhupada did. He couldn't spend his whole life with his spiritual master, but just in a few small instructions, he was able to create this entire worldwide ISKCON society, just by taking those instructions seriously. So we have the example of Srila Prabhupada, that if we take the instructions of our spiritual master seriously, then we can make great influence in the world. Not only can our lives become perfected, but we can help others also to become perfected. But that comes from proper sadhana, following the 4 regulative principles, chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra attentively, all of the basics. The foundation must be there, and then we can be assured, without fear, that wherever Krishna wants to place us in the next lifetime, I have done everything within this lifetime to perfect my life according to the instructions of my spiritual master. So we don't have to be fearful then, because it's not that, okay, I made it, it's over. No, this is an eternal process. We go on eternally, taking birth, just as the Supreme Lord does. Many, many births, both you and I have had, to help uplift the living entities. It's not over at the end of this lifetime. It's an eternal process. And we, as Tatastha Jivas, we have to always be under the shelter of our spiritual master's instructions, and then we're not in the material world. We're already in the spiritual world, associating with our spiritual master and the Supreme Lord, and we're here simply on a mission. And that's the way we live, and that's the way we go on, lifetime after lifetime, assisting our spiritual master wherever he goes. We have to understand there's no end to this process. We're eternally striving for more and more perfection. Even in the spiritual world, the associates come back here to the material world out of their compassion. So it's not over at any time. It's eternal. And therefore we have to always aspire to serve our spiritual masters, be prepared to travel wherever he goes to assist him in his mission to the Supreme Lord. So we don't have anything to be afraid of. Our responsibility is to follow the 4 regulative principles, chant minimum 16 rounds a day, and do everything we can to follow the instructions given to us by our spiritual master. Then we're protected. We don't have to worry about where we're going in our next lifetime. We go wherever our spiritual master wants to take us, because we're eternally his servants. Anything from the net? No, okay.
Hare Krishna. Mataji, as our children, sometimes we want to help them, or sometimes they want to help us. So we should accept their help, or sometimes they need the help, we should help them.
Of course, that's the responsibility of the father. Guru nasya syad, pita nasa syad. All of those, it's recommended. Don't become a father unless you can liberate your dependence. So you have children, you have a very nice son who comes here sometimes, and he's trying as far as possible to be Krishna conscious by your good example. If he needs help, yes, certainly assist him. We're not false renunciates. We brought the children into this world for the purpose of helping them advance in devotional service. And therefore, we should always be prepared to help our children advance if they're having some difficulty. Not that we leave our devotional service. We try to elevate them so that they can advance more in devotional service. That's the responsibility of the parents, to help our children come to the point of liberation so they can also take up devotional service. Prabhupada tried, he was unsuccessful to some extent. His children, some of them tried to help him, and some of them worked against him. And therefore, he left his home at the proper time for Vanaprastha, and then after 9 years, he eventually took sannyas. But he was horrified of the idea of taking sannyas originally. His spiritual master kept coming to him and advising him to take sannyas, and his children, they still associated with him. After he took sannyas, they would come to visit him. One of his sons tried to help him by distributing his books. So he still felt his commitment that he had to help his family become Krishna conscious, even after he took sannyas. So we never cut them off. We're always ready to assist anyone. Why not our own family members to become Krishna conscious? Up until the very end, his son was coming to visit him and trying to distribute Prabhupada's books, trying to associate with the devotees. So he was very fortunate to have Srila Prabhupada as his father, and he took advantage of that by associating with the devotees. He made his whole family into devotees. So yes, we have a responsibility to our children to help them in their devotional life, setting a good example, and then they'll want to take up that life just as we have done. And you'll see, by nice association, by setting a good example, your children, I know I've met your son, he's a very nice devotee, they'll also want to become devotees just like their father has or their mother has.
Also, they like to help, so we should accept the help of the children also.
Yes, of course. Yes, that's their service. And that's also their responsibility. They should help their parents in old age.